Well, thanks so much to Haymarket for inviting me to do this project, and they've been so wonderful to work with. And thanks to Haymarket Brewery for having us here, and to the panelists for joining me, and everyone for coming. It's exciting to see just this much interest and this kind of resistance bubbling up. So I'll read a little bit from the book, from the introduction, and then I'll introduce the panel, and we'll all talk, and then we'll have some time for questions and comments. So this is the introduction starting March 4th, 2012, about a little over a year after Rahm Emanuel was elected mayor. So March 4th, 2012 was Chicago's 175th birthday, and the city celebrated with a public party at the Chicago History Museum. The event promised actors portraying famous Chicagoans, including Jane Addams, founder of Hull House, an advocate for immigrants, children, and factory workers. Little did the organizers know that the show would be stolen by a woman some viewed as a modern-day Jane Addams, more eccentric and irascible, less renowned and accomplished, but just as willing to raise her voice and speak up for the weak and vulnerable. Mayor Rahm Emanuel grins broadly as the Chicago Children's Choir, dressed in red, sang a lively version of Happy Birthday. He had reason to smile. 10 months earlier, he'd been inaugurated as leader of the nation's third most populous city, taking the reins from legendary Mayor Richard M. Daley. And while his term hadn't been a cakewalk, so far things seemed to be going well. He had inherited a nearly $700 million budget deficit and attacked it with an aggressive round of cost-cutting and layoffs. The labor unions had resisted, but ultimately Emanuel was able to strike some deals and come out on top. Meanwhile, he was moving forward with his plans to institute a longer school day, a promise that had gained him positive attention nationwide. He was already assuming Daley's mantle as the Green Mayor. In February, he had announced that the city's 2 coal-fired power plants would close, and miles of new bike lanes were in the works. Emanuel had even snagged 2 important international gatherings for Chicago, the NATO and G8 summits, to be held concurrently in May 2012, the first time both would be hosted in the same U.S. city. There had been sit-ins and protests by community groups and unions related to the summits, to the school closings, and other issues, but Emanuel had shown a knack for avoiding and ignoring them, and so far he didn't seem to have suffered too much political fallout. As Emanuel watched the swaying, clapping singers at the birthday party, he didn't seem to notice a crinkled orange paper banner bobbing in the crowd of revelers. It said, "History will judge Mayor 1% Emanuel for closing mental health clinics." He'd gotten the moniker early on in his tenure. As Occupy Wall Street-inspired protests swept the nation, it was a natural fit for a mayor known for his high finance connections and brief but highly lucrative career as an investment banker. A staffer for the mayor or the museum did notice the banner and told the man holding it to put it away. Matt Ginsburg Jekyll complied, partially folding the banner and lowering it into the crowd. The song ended, and Emanuel began shaking hands with the singers and other well-wishers near a colorful, multi-tiered birthday cake. Then a shrill, rough voice cut through the chatter, causing heads to turn as the orange banner was unfurled and raised again. Mayor, I'm sorry, I wish I could do the voice of Helen Morley, which is burned into many people's memories, but I'm sorry, I'm not going to try. Mayor Emanuel, please don't close our clinics. We're going to die. There's nowhere else to go. Mayor Emanuel, please, cried a woman with a soft, pale face, red hair peeking out from a floral headscarf, and dark circles under her wide eyes that gave her an almost girlish, vulnerable expression. It was Helen Morley, a Chicago woman who had struggled all her life with mental illness, but still managed to become a vocal advocate for herself and others in the public housing project where she lived, and for other Chicagoans suffering from disabilities and mental illness. For the past 15 years, she'd been a regular at the city's mental health clinic in the Beverly Morgan Park neighborhood, a heavily Irish and African American working and middle class area on the city's southwest side. It was one of 6 mental health clinics that Emanuel planned to close as part of sweeping cuts in his inaugural budget. He said it made perfect economic sense. It would save $3 million, and the patients could move to the remaining 6 public clinics. But Morley and others pleaded that he didn't understand the role these specific clinics played in their lives and the difficulty they would have traveling to other locations. Morley's eyes were fixed unblinkingly on the mayor as she walked quickly toward him, calling out in that ragged, pleading voice, her gait and gaze intense and focused. Almost all eyes were on her, except for those of the mayor, who shook a few more hands and then pivoted quickly and disappeared through a door, studiously ignoring Morley the entire time. "Mayor Emanuel," she cried again as he dashed out. "Please stay here, Mayor Emanuel." The abruptness of the exit, the cake sitting there untouched, the lack of closing niceties, and the crowd milling around awkwardly gave the impression that the event had been cut much shorter than planned. With the mayor gone, Matt Ginsburg-Jackal and fellow activist J.R. Fleming stepped up on the stage and lifted the banner behind the cake. Morley centered herself in front of them and turned to face the remaining crowd, earnestly entreating, "People are dying. They aren't going to have nowhere to go." Emanuel's critics and admirers have both described him as a quintessential creature of Washington and Wall Street, a brilliant strategist and fundraiser who knows just the right way to leverage his famously abrasive personality to get wealthy donors to open their wallets and to help him win races. He became a prominent fundraiser for powerful politicians in his 20s. He made some $18 million in investment banking in just 2 years. He played central roles in 2 White Houses, and he orchestrated a dramatic Democratic takeover of the House of Representatives during his 6 years in Congress. He clearly knows how politicking works, but being mayor is different, or at least it should be. In Washington, people are often tagged as political allies or adversaries, fair game for manipulation or intimidation. In Congress, Emanuel represented his constituents, but the daily grind had a lot more to do with beltway machinations and maneuvers. Running a city where you are elected to directly serve people and listen to them is supposed to be a different story. But Emanuel was treating Chicago as if it were Washington. Perhaps that's why, even in his brief tenure as mayor, he has seemed to find it so easy to ignore the parents, teachers, pastors, students, patients, and others who have carried out multiple sit-ins and protests outside his 5th floor office in City Hall. These citizens frequently note that Daley had not been particularly accessible, sympathetic, or democratic in his approach, but at least he would meet with people, acknowledge them, make perhaps token efforts to listen to their proposals and act on their concerns. Emanuel can't seem to find the time for many members of the public, they complain, even as he says he wants their input on issues like school closings. Parents, grandparents, and students with the Kenwood Oakland Community Organization, for example, camped out in City Hall for nearly 4 days trying to deliver a formal plan that community members had drafted in conjunction with university experts to protect their local school from closing and create a network of educational resources in the surrounding low-income neighborhoods. His response was to ignore us, said G2 Brown, COCO's education organizer. We had our problems with Mayor Daley, but Daley surrounded himself with neighborhood people, and he himself was a neighborhood person. This man, Rahm Emanuel, has surrounded himself with corporate people. The administration is doing the bidding of the corporations and robbing us of the things our parents fought for. So that's to set up the battle lines a little bit. So now I want to introduce the panelists who've been kind of at the forefront of, well, even before Mayor Emanuel, but of the struggles that have really taken center stage since he took office. So Brandon Johnson is a teacher and organizer with and community activist with the Chicago Teachers Union. And Amisha Patel is with the Gressroots Collaborative, which launched the Take Back Chicago movement about 2 months ago. And Ben Joravsky is with the Chicago Reader, one of the mayor's probably favorite people from So we'll hear first from Brandon.
Well, thank you, Kari, for your intellect and bravery around this topic. And let me just say this, because the mayor of Chicago is always looking for opportunities to run commercials. And when Julie introduced the book, she said, Mayor 1%, and you all applauded. So if you're in a commercial cheering for Rahm Emanuel, you did it here tonight. So just be careful next time you applaud when 1% mayor is introduced. So let me also just say, it's an honor to be a public school teacher. And the threat against public education is not a conspiracy, it's real. The attack on public education, we can find the attack on public education at the very inception of this country. And so I would be remiss if I did not at least acknowledge all of my brothers and sisters of the Chicago Teachers Union.
Are we all adjusted?